Hello everyone, Christina here with my third video for Retro Flowers Week. This time I'm going to be using the Retro Flower stamps and dies. I did consider using the Petal Pop dies on this card, but eventually decided against it. I'm going to start out by doing some stamping on watercolor paper. This is Fabriano Artistico Extra White. And I'm going to be stamping that large background stamp right on top of the watercolor paper. Now, the watercolor paper doesn't like to stick to the grip mat inside my MISTI, so I'm going to tape that to the inside of my MISTI so that I have the opportunity to stamp this background stamp multiple times just to give myself the best chance of getting a solid stamping. The watercolor paper is quite textured, so sometimes it doesn't take the ink quite as evenly as a smooth cardstock would. So it really is beneficial to stamp multiple times and give yourself a little bit of time to really press down onto that door of the MISTI to really get a solid impression. So I'm stamping in white pigment ink. That's because I'm going to be using white embossing powder right on top. So I'm adding quite a bit of pressure. I think I stamped this background stamp 3 times total, just trying to get the best possible outcome. I then took some white embossing powder. This is Alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. And I tapped that onto this background multiple times, tried to really take my time, turn it around different directions to make sure that I had enough powder in every single area. And then used my heat tool to melt the embossing powder. Now, when you're melting embossing powder on watercolor paper, it does tend to want to soak into the paper. So the minute you see it's melted, move your heat tool. I taped my watercolor paper to a hardboard. And then we have our color inspiration. This is card 674 from the Sarah Renee Clark Color Cubes. This is the volume 3 cube, and there is a section called Retro Vibes. So I didn't mean to, but yesterday's video has a very similar color palette. But this time I'm going to be doing watercolor. So I'm using some Karin markers. These are the Brushmarker PROs. And I picked out colors from the color inspiration that best matched the markers. So here are all the colors I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using a size 6 and maybe also a size 4. I mostly use a size 4 brush from Escoda. This is their Prado line. And I'm going to start by doing the background in this nice green shade. And I'm going to be painting this entire background in the same way. I add a little bit of that marker directly to the watercolor paper and then bringing in a wet paintbrush. And I'll add in some other colors as we move along here too. once I was done with all of the painting on the background, I decided for the greeting, I wanted it to more directly match the watercolor. So I took 2 of the brown shades that I was using before, and I watercolored onto a scrap of watercolor paper. I did the lighter, more reddish brown, and then I kind of brought in some other instances of the cooler dark brown. And that just gave it a little bit of kind of a mottled look. It almost made it look a little bit velvet once it's a die cut. So I'm using the thank you words from the Retro Flowers dies. And I took a moment to dry that watercolor paper really well before using the die and my die cutting machine to cut out all of those letters. Now, I did want the grading to be pretty substantial on the card, so I'd already planned to die cut the letters twice more out of white cardstock and then stack everything all together. So I punched out all of the brown letters into my little cat dish here. And then I cut the other white letters and stacked the 2 white layers and then put that 3rd layer on top. I generally like to stack 4 layers of cardstock to get a nice substantial die cut. But since I used that thicker watercolor paper for the top layer, just because I wanted the colors to match, I decided that 2 layers of regular cardstock in white plus the watercolor paper on top would be just about the perfect thickness for these letters. I used a little bit of liquid glue to adhere all of these together. And once I had the letters stacked, then I added dabs of glue onto that shadow layer. And the scored letters on that shadow layer are perfect for this because it tells you exactly where to put the glue. So I just put dabs of glue where the letters would go, and then I brought over each individual letter and stuck that down. I like to put this under a paperweight for just a minute or 2 to give it the best chance to dry as well. I then removed my watercolor piece off of the hardboard, and I didn't want to lose any of this painting. I wanted to be able to use every single bit of it, so I trimmed it down at my paper trimmer, and here's all that I cut off. I basically just cut off the very edges, and then I decided, you know what, I'll put this on a 5x7 card base. The dimensions aren't right, but after I'm done with the card, I'll just lop off the bottom, and this will just be slightly smaller than a 5x7 card. So I put some foam tape on my watercolor panel. This is one of my best tips if you're doing a lot of watercolor cards. Always put your watercolor panel on foam tape and be generous with the foam tape. That foam is going to give it some stability, and your watercolor panel won't warp or curl up, which sometimes watercolor paper can do after you've added lots of color to it. So I adhered that directly to the card front. I then added some foam strips. These are foam strips from scrapbook.com. Just cut those down to kind of fill in all of those really strange areas on the die cut grading. And then I press that down onto the card. Now it looks kind of funny with all that white at the bottom, but like I said, I'm going to cut off the bottom, and this will kind of square up the card and make it look much more even. So I grabbed my cutting mat. This is a travel cutting mat from Altenew that folds in half. I just keep that off to the side of my work area because I don't like to cut into my glass mat because it can scratch the glass. I've done it in the past very carefully, but if I can avoid cutting onto the glass, I do that. So I'm just using very slow cuts with my craft knife here. If you go very low pressure and multiple times, you'll get a nice clean cut. So there's my card all cut down. And here's the finished card with that color inspiration. I think it turned out so beautiful. I love the texture of the watercoloring, especially on that grading, all popped up. It just looks very soft, kind of has a velvet look to it, which really lends itself to this color palette as well. Thank you so much for watching today and for joining me for Retro Flowers Week. This is such a fun bundle to use, whether you're stenciling or watercoloring or doing a bit of die cutting. It really can run the gamut of fun card inspiration. Thanks so much for joining me. I will see you on Monday for mail call. We're going to be opening up all the mail that you've sent to me for the month of July. Can't believe we're heading right into August. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.